LA Kings games can be very, very unspent. Plus, it's a Kings fan feed on the edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Well, it is a Kings fan feedback Friday. We're going to get to your emails in just a bit, but we start with the Kings in action on Friday. Kings starting a 3-game road trip in Dallas against the Stars, the second place team in the Central Division, one of the top teams in the West, and one of the top teams in the NHL. Dallas checked in with a record of 37-19-2 for 76 points. The Kings were 31-17-8 for 70 points going into the game. LA started the night in third place in the Pacific Division, but had an opportunity to move into second place past the Edmonton Oilers with a win in game number 57 of the NHL season. Checking the Kings lineup, we would have a few changes. We would start, though, with the forward lines. Anze Kopitar centering what's listed as the top line, with Alex Laferriere joining him and Alex Turcotte. So there's a change there. The listed second line, Philip Deneau with Warren Foegele and Trevor Moore. The third line, Quinton Byfield with Adrian Kempe and Kevin Fiala. And the fourth line would be Trevor Lewis with Tanner Jeannot and a rotating cast of characters at that other wing position. Akil Thomas was the lone forward that was a healthy scratch. So again, two new lines there. Kopitar, Turcotte with Laferriere added, and then Byfield and Fiala with Kempe added. As for the defensive pairings, we would have Mikey Anderson with Vladislav Gavrikov on the top pairing. Joel Edmondson would be rejoined by Drew Doughty on that second pairing. Doughty back after missing the previous game with a lower body injury. Jacob Overar and Jordan Spence, the third pairing, and Brant Clark would be the seventh extra defenseman as the Kings continue to go with the 11-7 setup. Darcy Kemper back in net as the starter after winning the previous game off of David Riddick would serve as the backup. So what was the big question going into this game for me? Well, would we see 3 solid periods from the Kings? They've had some amazing periods. They've had some not so good periods since returning from the Four Nations face-off break. But I just wanted to see 3 not perfect but hard-fought solid periods of hockey from the LA Kings. As for the game summary in this one, well, the Kings would fall behind early, 1-0, but responded immediately on a Warren Foegele goal, his 17th of the season. But things would then go off the rails a bit with a bit of tough luck for the Kings. A penalty called on Tanner Jeannot, a double minor for high sticking. The Stars would score on each of those minor penalties and take a 3-1 lead after one period. Felt like the Kings could get the next goal. They could still get back in the game, but unfortunately that didn't happen. Dallas would score their third power play goal of the game to make it 4-1. Now the Kings would get the next goal late in the period. Trevor Moore's 11th of the season. Kings were down 4-2 after 2. Still a chance if they could get the next goal, they could get back in the game. But things unfortunately went from bad to worse in the third as the Kings would give up an even strength and a shorthanded goal to make it 6-2, and that would be the final score. Kings fall in Dallas to the Stars 6-2. Overall in the season now, Kings 31-18-8 and 12-15-5 on the road. As for the game stats in this one, again, Kings lose 6-2. Shots on goal, narrowly favored Dallas 32-31. Special teams, though, another big story and another bad story for the LA Kings. They allowed 2 power play goals in 3 opportunities against, and they were 0 for 4 with the man advantage, and they also gave up a shorthanded goal. Faceoffs favored the Kings 34-24, hits favored LA 28-15, and block shots narrowly favored the Stars 16-15. So what was my big takeaway from this game? Look, there's no shame in losing to a very good Dallas team, especially on the road. But what was really concerning to me was not necessarily the loss or even the margin of victory. It's that 2 of the Kings' usual strengths defensive coverage and penalty kill were very poor in this game. As a matter of fact, the penalty kill has not been good since the Kings returned from the Four Nations break. In 4 games since the break, the Kings have allowed 5 power play goals on 9 shorthanded opportunities. That's terrible. So I said I wanted to see 3 solid periods from the Kings. Obviously, that didn't happen. I thought the Kings actually were okay 5-on-5, but 4 of the 6 goals were scored on special teams. Again, 3 power play, 1 shorthanded. But I think one of my big takeaways from this, I'm not looking for excuses here, but it was really unfortunate that a nothing play had such a huge impact on this game. And if you didn't see it, I mentioned it. First period, Tanner Jeannot, he's going to collide with a Dallas player. And he raises his hands to kind of brace himself for the hit. And in the process of doing that, his stick hit another Dallas player that was nearby in the face. He drew blood. The refs had to call it, even though it's really hard to fault Jeannot on the play. It wasn't, to me, that's just bad luck. But it really had a huge impact on the game. And now you could say, well, the Kings should have killed off the penalty. Okay, that's true. But the way it went from there, it just kind of snowballed. And the Kings gave up a goal on the power play right before the first minor penalty was to expire. So that meant that Dallas got another 2 minutes of power play time. If it had been 3 seconds later, then it would have been in that second minor, and then they wouldn't have had another opportunity. But they did, and they scored another goal on that power play. Before you know it, it's 3-1, and before the Kings could even kind of do anything, I thought they started well. They traded goals with Dallas, and it was a high-tempo game, and they were going back and forth. And then that happens, and it just really affected the game. And also, not only did the Kings give up 2 power play goals, but they really had to be shorthanded for 4 full minutes. And that obviously affected the lines. It affected their energy level the rest of the way. So that 1-0 kind of play ended up being a huge play. I'm not saying Dallas wouldn't have won the game anyway, had that play not happened, but we'll never know. It was tough to see the Kings get behind like that. And they have come from behind to win some games. We know they've had the third period magic lately, but typically when they're down more than a couple of goals, they're not the type of team that's typically going to come back from that. So I think certainly a big question was, how would the 2 new lines look? And it's a little bit hard to judge because of the circumstances of the game, but I would say that the Byfield, Fiala, Kempe line looked pretty good. Lots of energy. They had a few decent chances, but they didn't score any of the goals. And the Kopitar, Turcotte, Laferriere line honestly didn't do much at all. Ironically, the one line where the 2 goals came from was the line that didn't change, the Deneau line, where Trevor Moore and Warren Fogle scored the goals. And good news that both of those players are on hot streaks right now, or getting better right now, playing better right now. So there's that. But as far as the 2 new lines, really didn't have much of an impact. I'm sure we'll see it more than just one game going forward, so we can get a fair assessment of how those lines will do. So maybe a better idea if the game doesn't kind of get out of hand as far as how those 2 lines will look together going forward. Drew Doughty was back after missing the previous game with a lower body injury. I thought he looked okay as far as, did he look healthy? Did he look like he was skating normally? I thought he did, although he was in the box score of -3. So there's that. And the Kings miss a golden opportunity here. We're talking about how important it's probably going to be for the Kings to try and get home ice advantage in the first round. Maybe even if they can, get going at home the way they've played most of the season, get a few key road wins, they could even maybe win the division. But they had a chance to gain ground and also extend their lead over some of the teams that were chasing them by winning this game. That didn't happen. They could have passed Edmonton and taken over second place with a win, and they could have distanced themselves from both Vancouver and Calgary, as all 3 of those teams lost on Thursday, but the Kings couldn't take advantage of it with a win on Friday. So it's right back on the ice for the Kings on Saturday. Hopefully that's a good thing. Get right back up on that horse and get going, get that bad taste out of your mouth. They're in St. Louis against the Blues, a team that they're going to face 3 times in the next 4 games, oddly enough. And St. Louis is a team that's not in a playoff spot right now, but battling to try and get into a playoff spot. probably, the next couple of games are huge for them. If they don't win and they're going to have to, be behind 3 or 4 teams to try and get a wild card spot, you could see that maybe they'd be sellers at the trade deadline. So important games for the St. Louis Blues coming up. If you want to watch the game, you can see it on the FanDuel Sports Network locally, ESPN Plus nationally, and you can listen to it on the 710 ESPN app. Again, it's a 5 p.m. LA time start time on Saturday. Well, let's move off that disappointing game and get to your emails on this Kings Fan Feedback Friday. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. The NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets for a same-game parlay. FanDuel's live betting feature keeps you in every moment of the game. It keeps it exciting, whether you're backing your team for a late rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three-pointer. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, it is a Kings Fan Feedback Friday. Your chance to sound off, critique, praise, complain, celebrate our beloved Los Angeles Kings. We do this every Friday, off-season, regular season, postseason. So let's get to our first email. And these emails are going to be read in the order in which they were received. So obviously they came in throughout the week. And so I think you'll understand some people are emailing in right after a big win and so on and so forth. So our first email comes from Everydayer Brian in Tampa, Florida. And he sent in a couple of emails, but we're going to combine them into one. He said Rob Blake's off-season moves are really paying off. Getting Warren Fogle for 3 years at $3.5 million per year looks like a huge bargain. Joel Edmondson's seemed like an overpayment at $3.85 million per year, but he's one of our best plus-minus leaders. The Dubois trade for Darcy Kemper looked like a salary dump at first, but the trade has also upgraded the goalie position. The line of Fiala, QB, and Kempe in the Vegas game looked dynamic. I hope Jim Miller gives them a few more games together. It's great to see Trevor Moore getting hot as well. The Four Nations face-off break might have allowed him to get healthy. I see Nick Kyprios got a lot of headlines for adding Quentin Byfield to the latest trade board. QB has not been mentioned by any of the most respected insiders like Elliot Friedman, and insiders close to the Kings are saying it's not true. I think Kyprios was just looking for clicks. Trading QB right now makes 0 sense. Go Kings, go. And that was from Brian in Tampa. It's hard not to agree that Rob Blake's offseason moves look very good. However, the PLD trade is still a huge mark against him, even though Kemper is playing well. Gabe Velarde is really just what the Kings need right now, a right shot who can play and is a young player for years to come, somebody you could have who's a right shot and can help on the power play, can score goals. He's got 22 goals, 11 of them on the power play this year for the Winnipeg Jets. So that is still a huge miss for Blake. He's made the best out of cleaning up his own messes, but he still made a mess to begin with. And if you look at it, I mean, the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade was a trade that didn't even need to happen. When you look at the Kings' 3 centers right now, they were all on the team before he decided to make that trade. So as for the Byfield, Fiala, Kempe line, talked about it a little bit already. We'll have to see them play obviously a little bit more, but they look like certainly a line that creates a lot of energy and can get chances. The only thing I fear, and I've talked about this before, is that Kevin Fiala will look to defer and be a setup guy. And I think we have to have Kevin Fiala being a scorer. If he and Kempe can coexist, both being shoot first players, both looking for their shots constantly, not deferring to one another, then I'm fine with it. But once that happens, I think that's not the best thing for those two players. And we'll see. And the Kopitar line without Kempe, didn't look very dangerous, but that's one game. We'll see. We got to give it more time to be fair. For those of you that don't know who Nick Kyprios is, he's a former NHL player. He's now a broadcaster in Canada. And yes, on social media this week, he floated out that Quentin Byfield was someone that the Kings might be looking to move. I agree. I don't think there is anything to it at all. I think it is absolute clickbait, which is fine. And certainly he got a lot of clicks and he got a lot of responses, and we're talking about it. So he got what he wanted out of it. But I look, no one's untouchable, but the price would have to be extremely high. I would be totally shocked if Quentin Byfield was traded at the deadline. Our next email comes from Carlos in Mexico City. And good to see that apparently Carlos is doing well from his heart surgery because he's doing things like emailing this show. He says, I felt relieved after the win over Vegas, and I posted, just like Sir Lancelot with Arthur, knights should always bow to their kings. He says, we have the best home record in the NHL with 17 remaining home games as I write this. If we just average 1.5 points per home game and 1 point per road game, we'd have 105 points, and I believe that's enough to take the Pacific Division. Kopi has been a no-show for a few weeks. Is he okay? And has anyone asked Doughty how it felt hugging McDavid? I don't care if they're Team Canada. I'm a King first, and I would have spit in his eye. How many other Kings fans feel the same way? And that was from Carlos in Mexico City. Well, I'm sure that Kings fans would be just fine with a Kings player hugging Connor McDavid if he was, I don't know, playing for the U.S. or if he was playing for the LA Kings. But I understand what you're saying, Carlos. I have not heard anything about Anze Kopitar nursing any kind of an injury. It certainly would explain how his production has dipped sharply compared to the first few months of the season to the last few months, but I have not heard anyone say anything about him nursing an injury. And I'm not sure as far as your math goes, as far as the points and home wins and all that stuff. But look, the Kings need to keep winning on home ice the way they have all season. Probably need to win 2 of the remaining 3 head-to-head matchups against Vegas and Edmonton, and I think they'll be right there. But they also have to win their winnable games as well, and they've got some of them coming up here, including the next 2 against St. Louis and especially Chicago. Scott in Simi Valley checking in. He says, I'm writing just after the overtime loss to the Canucks. Credit to the guys for never quitting. We've seen some awesome third period pushes this week, but that power play, wow, the Kings have a truly miserable power play. With all the positives for this team, there's been many. If we want to get to the second round of the playoffs, the power play has to change. I know it's rare to change assistant coaches in season, but how bad does this organization want to advance? The choice is a no-brainer. Make changes now, even if an assistant coach has to be replaced or even reversing tee times at the golf course. As it is, the Kings power play stinks, and it'll be the Achilles heel for the team in the playoffs. Let's see how badly the organization wants a shot at the cup. I hope they do the right thing. And again, that was Scott in Simi Valley. He's talking about Newell Brown, who's the assistant coach the Kings brought in to work on the power play this year. I would be shocked if that happens because it just doesn't happen. In-season assistant coaching changes are extremely rare. So I don't anticipate that happening. More likely, the Kings need to do something at the trade deadline to try and help the power play. And yes, you're right. The power play stinks. And as much as Jim Hiller has done a lot of good with this team this year, that is the one glaring issue that he and his assistants have not addressed. And you're right. If it's this bad, it's hard to imagine it's not going to hurt them in a possible playoff series. Dave in Seattle checking in. He says it's getting so frustrating watching the Kings' lack of power play execution. The overtime against Vancouver was such a blown opportunity. I still don't understand why they choose to stop skating in these situations. They tend to generate great chances in overtime when they have possession and speed. They could have had that many more great chances on a 4-on-3 with all that open ice. Instead, they choose to slow down and go into their ineffective power play formation. So frustrating. Also, speaking of overtime, I think the NHL should adopt the point system used in the Four Nations tournament. 3 points for a win, 2 points for an overtime win, 1 point for an overtime loss. Makes way more sense. Thanks for all you do, Eddie. Hit me up if you're ever up for a game in Seattle. Go Kings, go. And that was Dave in Seattle. Dave, Seattle is very high on my list of places to go see a Kings road game. My wife was born in Seattle, although she was not raised there. She was her dad was in the Navy and he was stationed there when she was born. But she loves Seattle. I love it as well. So again, it's really high up on the list of places I'd like to see the Kings as far as a road game. Obviously, we've talked about the power play. It is frustrating. Look, if I had the answers, I would have given them to Jim Hiller a long time ago. Of course, he would never listen to me, but we've talked about this before. I just think when it's going bad, I think you go back to basics. And to me, it's about getting shots and crashing the net. It's the most basic thing in hockey. But I would tell the guys at every opportunity, put it on net and go to the net. It couldn't be any worse than it is now, right? Just being as basic as you can be. Forget about looking to set up a play. Just get it to the point and get a shot on goal and crash the net. That's my solution, and it's not a great solution, but like I said, it couldn't be any worse than what it is now. As far as the NHL changing to the Four Nations point system, I don't see that happening. And Gary Bettman was even asked that question directly, the NHL commissioner, and he said that they like things the way they are. And the reason that is the case is that the NHL loves parity, and they want as many fans to be invested in the season for as long as possible. And the current point system really helps that. If they use the Four Nations point system, more often than not, teams would be out of the playoff picture earlier than they are now. So, if you're, for example, the St. Louis Blues, if you're a Blues fan, you're out of the playoff picture now. I think they're behind Calgary and Utah. But they're in the mix. And so there's still hope, right, with that fan base. And you're still sort of invested in that. If you had a different point system, that might not be the case. So from what I understand, it would be more likely that wouldn't be the case. So again, the NHL wants fans to be invested in the season as long as possible. And so it's not likely that they're going to do that. All right, we still have some more emails to get to, including a Wayne Gretzky email coming in. That's next. You're on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. If you're like me, your mornings have to start with a good cup of coffee. But I got tired of settling for grocery store brands that just weren't cutting it. That's why I turned to Trade. That's the name of it, Trade. And let me tell you, this coffee is next level. Trade is the #1 specialty coffee marketplace in the U.S., bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste tested thousands of coffees, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, their hand-picked coffee will find the perfect match for you. The subscription makes it so easy. No more last-minute grocery store runs or settling for whatever's left on the shelf. If you don't love your first bag, no worries. Trade will replace it for free until they get it just right. Right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL. That's drinktrade, TRADE.com/LockedOnNHL for 40% off your first order. drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL. All right, let's get back to your emails. This from Arturo in Long Beach, and he says, "Hey, Eddie, just want to say I wish nothing but the best for Jesse Cohen, and my thoughts and prayers go out to him and his family. I was able to meet him at the Toyota Sports Performance Center in El Segundo for donating for the fire relief, and he was a really nice person right off the bat. We talked about his podcast and the Kings Talk. I hope he makes a speedy recovery. Go, Jesse, go." And that was Arturo in Long Beach. And absolutely, Jesse, really appreciate you saying that. For those that may not be on X or Twitter, Jesse did post, I believe it was on Thursday, that he did start his first of 12 chemo treatments. So he's starting his battle. His journey is just getting underway. And if you happen to be on X or Twitter and you want to send him some well wishes, he is at Kingsmen Podcast. And obviously we are wishing Jesse all the best in his fight going forward. Tim in Indiana checks in. He says, "I'm a longtime Kings fan like you. I was born and raised in Southern California. I currently live in Danville, Indiana, a smallish town west of Indianapolis. I have one hockey friend here to talk with, so I just want to thank you for your podcast. It keeps me connected to the team, and I've watched them whenever I can. The 9:30, 10:30 p.m. start times are rough, so I at least catch the highlights. I want to get your opinion on what the Kings need to do to get the power play dialed in. I love hockey, but I don't know all the X's and O's. So what any trades that they're looking at? I love listening to you, and if you can please pass along a get well to Jesse Cohen. As I saw, he's dealing with a major health issue. I don't know if you actually talked to him, but wanted him to know that he is in my thoughts way out here in the Midwest." And again, that was Tim in Indiana. Tim, again, thank you for that. I'm sure that Jesse has received a ton of well wishes. I sent him a message. I haven't heard from him back, but I'm sure, look, first of all, he's got more important things to do. And I know when I lost my job, I was overwhelmed with the number of messages and emails, which was awesome. Just to know people care, which is really nice. but it took a long time for me to respond just to that. And I didn't even have a job anymore. So I haven't heard back from Jesse. I'm sure I will at some point, but as I said with the earlier emails, I'm sure he very much appreciates your thoughts and well wishes. And if you are on X or Twitter and you want to send a message, certainly you can do that as well. We've talked about it with the power play. I think just get back to basics. I don't know what else they can do at this point other than going out and getting someone to help with that power play at the trade deadline. As far as some names, we've talked about it. An Alex Tuck, a Jonathan March or so, somebody like that, I think could be very impactful, not only with the offense, but the power play as well. Those would be my two at the top of the list. And we'll probably do a show next week. The trade deadline's coming up next Friday. And we'll probably do one of our shows next week will be devoted to maybe a ranking of the players available and just some names that maybe the Kings will be looking at. Sorry for the pause, as I had a scratchy throat and needed to cough and take a sip of my beverage. Apologies for that. Let's get to our next email. This is from Chuck in Harbor City. And he says, Jason Robertson and Trevor Moore both scored in the game against in Dallas. I wondered how many times two California-born players have scored a goal in an NHL game. Chuck, I don't know the answer to your question. But the reason he's asking is that Trevor Moore, obviously from Thousand Oaks, Jason Robertson was born in Arcadia, both scoring games in that Kings Stars game. I will say, considering that Austin Matthews, you may or may not know, was born in California, then I have to believe that it's happened a few times at least. And that's just talking about current players. So I did a little research. I saw something where it could tell you could type in certain stats, but you had to pay for it. It was a pay site, and I love you, Chuck, but I'm not going to pay for that to answer your question. But just as far as current players that were born in California, you've got Jason Robertson, you've got Jason Zucker, who was born in Newport Beach, and you've got Austin Matthews, who was born in California, raised in Scottsdale, Arizona, but born in California. So those three guys, all active players, are the three highest goal scoring California-born players in NHL history. And Jason Zucker's been around for a while. I got to believe that Austin Matthews and Jason Zucker, or Austin Matthews and Jason Robertson, have scored goals in the same game before. I would think. So I don't think it's not common, because there's only, active California-born players. I think there's probably like 12 maybe all time. I would guess maybe it's in the 30s or 40s maybe, but I'm pretty sure it's happened before. How many times? I unfortunately cannot tell you how many times. By the way, Jason Zucker is playing for the Buffalo Sabres. He's a well-traveled guy. He's a goal scorer. He's probably going to be moved at the deadline. And I don't know if he would like to come back and play in his in the state of his birth. I think he was raised in Las Vegas. But anyway, he's probably going to be on the move. I don't know if the Kings will be interested in him. He's not a right-handed shot, but he is a guy that can score, and he could help on the power play. He's got 18 goals, 9 power play goals this year. So that's a name to keep in mind, Jason Zucker. Ed and Brea checking in with our final email. He says, I just wanted to say I feel bad for Wayne Gretzky. At the moment, he is getting a lot of backlash in his native Canada because of the tensions between the U.S. and Canada politically. As hockey fans, I believe sports should bring us together despite our differences, beliefs, and opinions. Definitely hockey. Just sad to hear as an American fan, that Gretzky, who I believed is a genuine man who's heartbroken over the negative opinions about him. He did a lot for Canada. He obviously did a lot for the sport here in the States and for the Kings. When I think of Gretzky, I think of appreciation for him and his legendary career. Just taken aback by what is happening now. Like I said, I don't want to get too political. However, as a Kings fan, I appreciate what the great one did for hockey, both in Canada and the U.S. I guess we live in a different era now. Go Kings, go. And that was Ed in Brea. Well, not being Canadian, certainly it's difficult for us to comment on how Canadians feel about what's going on. So if you don't know, if you haven't heard, Wayne Gretzky is getting a lot of backlash because he has not spoken out against Donald Trump and the things that Trump is saying about Canada. I guess that Gretzky is some sort of friend of Donald Trump. I don't know how close they are. I'm sure they've played golf together. Donald Trump put out a message on X and Twitter kind of supporting Wayne Gretzky, although it probably did more harm than good, which is not a surprise. So yeah, I mean, look, Wayne Gretzky, I'm sure he's a very proud Canadian. Also, I mean, he's probably lived longer and worked more in the United States than he did in Canada. His wife is American. His kids were born in America. He lives in America. He's continuing to get paid by working for an American company, TNT, as a broadcast analyst of sorts. So he certainly has ties to both countries. And Wayne is a non-confrontational guy by all accounts. He certainly seems to be a non-political guy. He's never been very outspoken on certain topics. So yeah, I feel bad for him as well. I don't know the people that are criticizing him in Canada. I'm guessing those are probably not really hockey fans, but people who are more political than they are into sports, and they want his name attached to their side of the story. But yeah, I feel bad for him as well, to be honest with you. I know he's gotten a lot of backlash apparently in Canada because he has not spoken up against Donald Trump. So unfortunate, but apparently that's the case. Hey, thank you to everyone who took time to email. Really appreciate it. This show is not possible without your participation. So thank you to everyone who took the time. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll have to do another one next week. If you want to get an email into the show for the future, it is lockedoneddie@gmail.com. That's the email address. You can also leave your comments if you're watching on YouTube in the comment section. If you want to be interactive on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, we're at Locked On LA Kings. For you everydayers, those of you that listen to watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on Saturday, we're going to recap the Kings Blues game shortly after its conclusion and hope that we can talk about a much better game for the LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thanks for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings go.